Hey everyone, did you know that over 90% of you watching right now haven't hit that subscribe button? If you enjoy our content, take a second to subscribe. It's free and it really helps us keep bringing you great stories every day. The evening air hung unusually still in the sleepy neighborhood of Cedar Lane. Sprinklers ticked rhythmically in the distance, slicing arcs of water over freshly manicured lawns. Inside one particular home, a modest but well-furnished two-story with clean shutters and a wraparound porch, time seemed to stretch long and taut like a drawn bowstring. The silence inside was heavy, the kind that seemed to lean against the walls and press into the lungs of everyone sitting in the dining room. Clara Porter stood in the foyer, still holding her purse, her fingers frozen around the leather strap. Her heels had clicked across the hardwood floor only moments ago. Sharp, precise, too quick. Now they stood still and her breath caught as she looked ahead. At the dining table sat three people: her husband, Daniel Porter, her mother, Evelyn Fairchild, and a stranger she recognized immediately, though she'd never met him face to face. He was the man from the photos, the private investigator. Daniel sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed in a way that made Clara's heart beat faster. He wasn't a man prone to theatrics or anger, but there was something unsettling about how calm he looked, how composed. He wore a soft gray sweater, sleeves rolled just below his elbows, and his wedding band glinted under the light fixture above. He tapped his index finger once against a folder that rested in front of him. "Clara," he said simply, "why don't you join us?" Her eyes darted to her mother, who sat uncomfortably upright, arms crossed tightly, her lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval. The private investigator, a man in his mid-50s with graying temples and a weathered leather jacket, did not speak. He only observed, a pad of notes resting in front of him closed. Clara stepped forward slowly, mechanical in her movements, as if her body was now operating separately from her thoughts. She placed her purse on the hallway bench and walked into the dining room, her eyes never leaving her husband's. She sat. Daniel leaned forward and opened the folder with the same care one might use to handle an antique book. "I'll start," he said gently, "because I want to be fair." Clara's mouth parted slightly, her throat dry. No words came. Daniel took a sheet from the folder and turned it around for her to see. It was a high-resolution photograph, a hotel lobby. She and Marcus, her boss, arms close, heads tilted together, laughter evident even in the still frame. There were more. The private investigator quietly slid an envelope across the table toward her. Inside were time-stamped images, receipts, flight confirmations. "I know everything," Daniel said. The words weren't bitter. They were simply a conclusion, stated like a fact, like saying, "The sun will rise tomorrow," or "We need more milk." But the impact was seismic. Evelyn shifted in her seat. Her eyes were rimmed with unshed tears. "How could you do this, Clara?" she asked softly. "To Daniel? To your vows? To yourself?" Clara finally spoke, her voice uneven. "You had someone follow me?" "No," Daniel replied. "I had someone follow Marcus, at first. It started when you stopped looking me in the eye." Clara looked away. Shame and panic rose like a tidal wave. Her throat burned. "You were always careful," Daniel continued. "You never used your phone, never texted. Smart. But habits change, patterns shift, and I pay attention." His words were not cruel, there was no venom in them. They were observations delivered like puzzle pieces snapping into place. Clara gripped the edge of the table. "It wasn't... I didn't mean for it to go so far." Daniel nodded. "I believe you." She blinked. "You do?" "I do," he repeated. "But you still did." The silence that followed was suffocating. A breeze from the open kitchen window rustled the edge of the linen table runner. The house, once filled with quiet domestic routines, weekend baking, movie nights, and garden projects, suddenly felt unfamiliar. Daniel reached under the folder and pulled out another document. "The prenup," he said. Clara's heart stopped. She remembered the discussion years ago, how she had signed it casually out of love and trust. Daniel came from old money, she didn't. At the time, she saw it as a formality. He slid it across to her, open to a highlighted paragraph. Clause 17, he said. Infidelity voids any claim to marital assets. Clara looked down. The words were there, black ink clear on crisp paper, her signature beside his. You're divorcing me, she said hollowly. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he leaned back, clasped his hands in front of him, and looked her in the eye. Number not yet. Clara swallowed hard. Then what is this? This, he said, tapping the document, is the roadmap. I wanted you to see it, to know that I've thought through every step. There won't be a scene. No lawyers fighting over China or who gets the dog. I don't want revenge, Clara. I just want my life back. She turned to her mother, whose expression was a blend of sorrow and disappointment. Evelyn couldn't meet her daughter's gaze for long. The private investigator finally spoke. My job is done. I just thought Mr. Porter deserved to see the truth before making any decisions. I'll be on my way. He rose, nodded politely, and left without another word. The front door closed behind him with a soft click. Clara's voice trembled. Daniel, please, let's talk. Really talk. Just you and me. Daniel shook his head. You've had months to talk. But you chose silence and secrets. I didn't know what I wanted. That, he said, is the only honest thing you've said tonight. Evelyn stood. I'll give you both space. She paused at Clara's side, hesitating, then gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. It lingered for a second before pulling away. Daniel waited until they were alone. The tension in the room pulsed like static electricity. I'm not going to fight you, he said. I won't smear your name or drag this out. But I need you to leave tonight. Clara's breath caught. Tonight? He nodded. I've already made arrangements. There's a hotel booked under your name. Your things are packed in the guest room. You can take them or leave them. That's up to you. She stood, dazed, her knees almost giving way. Daniel rose too, slower, more deliberate. He didn't reach for her, didn't flinch. I still love the person I married, he said, but I don't know who you are anymore. Her voice cracked. I'm still me. You're not, he said quietly. And maybe neither am I. She stared at him for a long moment, as if hoping some part of him would soften. But the calm in his expression was not cruel, it was resolute. He had already mourned the marriage. This was just the closing act. Clara turned and walked to the guest room. The suitcase was there, neatly packed. Not spitefully, just efficiently. Clothes folded, toiletries included, even her favorite books carefully placed on top. She sat on the edge of the bed and pressed her hands to her face. The tears didn't come right away. Only when she heard the faint clink of Daniel clearing the dishes in the dining room, so normal, so routine, did she finally break. 10 minutes later, she stepped outside. The porch light was still on. The night air smelled faintly of jasmine and wet earth. As she walked down the driveway, pulling her suitcase behind her, the windows of the house glowed warmly from within. And behind them, Daniel Porter sat alone at the kitchen table, finishing the dinner that had grown cold. The next morning, a soft rain drizzled over Cedar Lane, casting a silvery veil over rooftops and dripping from the branches of the cherry tree outside Clara's hotel window. The room was perfectly nice, neutral-toned, immaculately clean, but it smelled faintly of industrial carpet and air conditioning. Impersonal. Clara lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, the suitcase still zipped by the door. She hadn't slept. Her eyes were red-rimmed, dry, yet incapable of producing another tear. A half-empty glass of water sat on the nightstand beside her, untouched since check-in. She kept replaying the night before, the way Daniel had sat so still, so calm, as if the destruction of their marriage were just a budget meeting or a real estate transaction. His lack of anger somehow hurt more than if he had shouted. The prenuptial agreement had always seemed like something that existed only in the abstract, something polite society did to protect itself. But now it was a fortress she couldn't breach. Every detail had been handled before she even knew she was under suspicion. Her phone buzzed once, a message from her mother. Call me when you can. I'm worried about you. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't. She rose, ran a brush through her hair, and wrapped a cardigan around her shoulders. She stared at herself in the mirror. The same face, the same high cheekbones, the same careful mascara, but none of it looked familiar anymore. By noon, she was sitting across from her best friend, June, at a cafe in the neighboring town. Clara hadn't told June the full story, only that she and Daniel were on a break. But June knew something was wrong. Her brow furrowed as she sipped her coffee. Clara, you've said barely 3 sentences in 45 minutes. What's going on? Clara hesitated, then leaned in, her voice low. Daniel knows about Marcus. June froze, her spoon suspended halfway over a cup of tomato soup. Wait, he knows? Clara nodded. He hired someone, a private investigator. He had pictures, flight records, receipts. June blinked. Oh my God. I didn't think he was paying attention, Clara said, barely above a whisper. He's always been so measured, kind, quiet. But he saw everything. What did he say? Clara stared at her hands. Nothing cruel, nothing loud. He just laid it all out. Evidence, the prenup, and then he asked me to leave. That night, like I was being let go from a job. June sighed and reached across the table to squeeze Clara's hand. I won't lecture you. I know there must have been reasons, but Daniel, he adored you. I know. June paused. What about Marcus? Clara pulled her hand away and sat back. Marcus is married. He made it clear this was always temporary. June didn't respond. The silence between them filled the space like smoke. Thick, suffocating. Later, Clara drove past her and Daniel's home. The porch lights were off, the curtains drawn. She didn't park, just slowed the car, taking in the stillness. She imagined him inside, perhaps reading one of the books she had recommended over the years, maybe drinking coffee from the mug she had once gifted him for their anniversary. Inside, Daniel was doing neither. He stood in the garage, staring at a shelf cluttered with remnants of their shared life. Gardening tools, a bicycle they had planned to fix, a dusty box of Christmas lights, all of it familiar but suddenly hollow. He picked up a photo album from a shelf, an old one, leather-bound and scuffed at the corners. The early years, their first trip to Italy, Clara laughing in the rain, holding a broken umbrella, Daniel looking younger, leaner, wearing the same cardigan she now had on in her hotel room. He closed the album slowly. Later that week, Daniel sat in his office at the firm. His assistant, a young man named Tyler, knocked softly on the open door. You okay, sir? You've been in there a lot this week. Daniel offered a faint smile. Just catching up on things. You want me to cancel your meeting this afternoon? Daniel paused. Number, I'll handle it. He adjusted his tie and returned to the spreadsheet in front of him, but the numbers blurred. The truth was, for all his control, all his logic, Daniel was unraveling too, just more quietly. That night, Clara returned to the house. She didn't knock. She had used the spare key from under the garden rock, something Daniel hadn't thought to remove. The house smelled the same. Cinnamon air freshener, clean laundry, and the faintest trace of lemon from the wood polish. He found her standing in the kitchen, arms crossed tightly around herself, her face pale. You shouldn't be here, he said from the threshold. I know. Then why are you? Because this still feels like home, she said. And I needed to remember what I destroyed. Daniel walked past her to the sink and filled a glass of water. He sipped it slowly, then set it down. You didn't destroy it, he said. You just removed yourself from it. That's not fair. He turned, meeting her eyes. It's accurate. I never stopped loving you, Daniel. You stopped respecting me. That's worse. Clara flinched. Daniel sighed and leaned against the counter. What do you want from me, Clara? Closure. A conversation. Something. We've already had it, he said. You just didn't know it was happening. I made a mistake. No, he corrected gently. You made a choice. A mistake is burning dinner. What you did was different. Clara wiped at her eyes, frustrated. I felt invisible, Daniel. You were always so focused, always working. I needed to feel seen. Then why Marcus? He asked. Why someone who could never actually offer you anything real? I don't know. Yes, you do, he said. You just don't want to admit it. They stood in the kitchen, the tension between them stretching across years of built trust, now splintered and hanging by threads. Finally, Daniel spoke. You know what I find strange? What? I'm not angry. Clara stared. I thought I would be, he said, but I'm just done. It's like a switch flipped. The moment I saw the truth, something inside me went quiet. She nodded slowly. That's how it ends, isn't it? Yes, quietly, not with a scream, not with plates breaking, just with stillness. I want to fix this, she said. Daniel took a deep breath. Then fix yourself. He didn't say it with cruelty. There was no judgment in his tone, just honesty. The kind that comes from someone who no longer sees repair as an option, for the relationship at least. He walked past her toward the hallway, then stopped and turned slightly. I'll have the paperwork delivered by the end of the week. You won't be without help. My lawyer will make sure you have what's fair, even beyond the prenup. Why? She asked, voice cracking. Why help me at all? He turned back fully now. Because I loved you, and because I'd rather let go with grace than hold on with bitterness. Clara didn't speak. She watched him walk into the living room and lower himself into the armchair by the fireplace. It was only then that she realized she was no longer a part of that space, not in the way she used to be, and this time she did knock before leaving. Outside, the rain had started again, soft and steady. She walked to her car, started the engine, and sat for a long time before driving off. Her reflection stared back at her in the rearview mirror, not the woman who once stood in wedding lace and promised forever, but someone changed. Not ruined, not wicked, but undeniably lost. As she turned the corner at the end of Cedar Lane, the streetlights flickered on behind her. Another evening was beginning, another day in the life she used to have. 6 months passed. Autumn crept into Cedar Lane like a gentle whisper. Trees turned the color of rust and ember, shedding their leaves slowly, blanketing the sidewalks in amber gold. Porch lights glowed earlier now, flickering on before the sun had fully disappeared. The familiar suburban hush returned, but for Clara Porter, nothing had returned to how it was. She had moved into a small apartment 20 minutes away, an efficient one-bedroom above a bakery with tall windows and creaky floorboards. The air always smelled faintly of bread and sugar, but the warmth of those smells only highlighted the emptiness of her space. She hadn't decorated much. A few framed photos, some books on a shelf, one chair in the corner that no one else ever sat in. Life had narrowed. The divorce had finalized quietly. No court battles, no drawn-out emails. Daniel had kept his word, offering more than the prenup required. Clara's lawyer had called it unusual generosity, but Clara hadn't fought it. She had signed every document with a trembling pen and a growing awareness of how thoroughly her choices had reshaped her future. She no longer worked for Marcus. That had ended abruptly, days after everything unraveled. Whether it was his decision or hers, Clara still didn't know. The company had announced Marcus's quiet resignation not long after, some personal restructuring nonsense. It didn't matter. That chapter had closed too. On a particularly crisp Sunday morning, Clara walked through the local farmer's market, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck. She moved slowly, aimlessly, pausing at booths she didn't intend to buy from. Her hands wrapped around a cup of cider, more for warmth than thirst. She was thinner now, and not from vanity or dieting. It was the kind of weight loss that came from absence, of laughter, of security, of routine. She bumped into June, who greeted her with a long, wordless hug. The kind of hug that said, I know you're not okay, but I'm here. Want to come to dinner next weekend? June asked. Just a few friends. Casual Clara hesitated. I might. I'm trying to say yes more. That's a start. It was. A start. Meanwhile, Daniel's life had shifted, but less visibly. The house on Cedar Lane remained his. He had repainted the study, taken down most of the framed photos of the past, and planted new marigolds in the garden bed she used to tend. Some days were harder than others. He still woke up occasionally expecting to hear her humming in the kitchen. Sometimes he would turn to comment on something, only to remember the other side of the bed was empty. But Daniel didn't dwell in bitterness. He didn't retell the story to friends over drinks or post cryptic messages online. He simply moved forward, one small decision at a time. He started hiking again, something he hadn't done in years. He joined a local volunteer group that renovated community spaces on weekends. He began smiling more, softly, genuinely, like a man rediscovering his shape outside the shadow of disappointment. One quiet afternoon, Clara mailed him a letter. It wasn't long, just a page and a half, written by hand, folded with care. She didn't apologize in the way people often do when they're looking for something in return. She didn't ask for reconciliation. The words were thoughtful, restrained. You gave me the gift of quiet consequences, and in that silence, I've learned more about myself than I ever thought possible. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know you were the better part of me, and I'm sorry I didn't protect that. Daniel read it once, folded it back into the envelope, and placed it inside the drawer of his desk. He didn't write back. Not because he was angry, but because he had already spoken his piece the night she walked out. Still, the letter sat in the drawer. Not out of sentimentality, but because part of him knew that closure didn't always come with perfect words or dramatic reunions. Sometimes it arrived quietly, in handwritten apologies, new habits, and the peaceful realization that letting go doesn't have to mean discarding love altogether. It just means recognizing that love, once broken, doesn't always heal back into what it was. But it can still become something else. A memory, a lesson, a kindness held in the past tense. A month later, Daniel met someone. Her name was Elise. A friend of a friend, soft-spoken, intelligent, with a smile that built slowly but stayed when it came. He didn't rush into anything. He told her the truth from the beginning, that he was healing, that he wasn't looking to replace anything, only to move forward with honesty. Elise understood. She wasn't interested in borrowed pieces of anyone. She was whole herself and didn't want to be anyone's distraction. Their first real conversation was about books. The second was about music. By the third, Daniel felt something shift, not in the same way it had before, but something new. A beginning rooted not in escape, but in choice. Clara, too, began to rebuild, not with grand gestures, but with small, intentional acts. She started therapy. She adopted a gray cat from the shelter, naming him Marlowe. She began journaling again, something she hadn't done since college. Slowly, she began to laugh again. Not often, but when it came, it surprised even her. One rainy afternoon, she sat in her apartment, legs curled beneath her, cat asleep on her lap, and she wrote the word forgive at the top of the page. She stared at it for a long time. Then she wrote underneath, forgiveness isn't a door you wait at. It's the one you build for yourself, plank by plank, until you can walk through it and finally breathe again. She wasn't sure if Daniel would ever truly forgive her, but that no longer needed to be her salvation. Her path wasn't marked by punishment. It was shaped by learning. The kind that doesn't end with punishment or redemption, but with truth and clarity. Back on Cedar Lane, the leaves continued to fall. Another season gave way to winter, and then to spring. Time moved the way it always does, slowly, then all at once. Daniel stood by the cherry tree one morning, pruning dead branches. As he looked up at the fresh buds beginning to bloom, he smiled softly. Not because things were back to normal, but because normal no longer mattered. There was peace now. And peace, he had learned, is rarely loud. It arrives when all the storms have passed, when all the words have been said, when you are finally able to sit with the silence and feel whole.